Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
We're not here to lecture or to, be the experts on anything. We're just here to talk and check in and just talk and ask questions and see what happens. This isn't like a presentation or slideshow.
Our other resilient summits had a kind of like a topic we had banded together as positive psychology practitioners and friends at the beginning of quarantine, because we felt like we had some tools that we could share with everyone, and that was the intent. And our intent was originally to meet today for our third one, so we could just maybe talk about relationships and things, again, still related to quarantine. But then, obviously with current events and everything that has gone on in the last week, we got together and we just talked as friends. And it was a very beautiful and powerful and much needed conversation. And we thought that our time today could be spent kind of offering that to other people as well, because we need to continue to have conversations where we feel safe, where it's okay to feel confused, and where it's okay to ask questions, and know that we're in a compassionate space.
Yeah.
Amber, what would you like to say as an opening?
Oh, I'm not opening. Danny's opening. So I think he's going to get us started with the conversation. Yeah. Right. But hello, everyone. And Annmarie, that was very well put. Thank you for welcoming and opening us up.
Yeah, I think Annmarie said it well. So I don't know, let's just check in. How's everybody doing? How are we feeling at this moment?
And definitely feel like you can use the chat or unmute yourselves, whichever way makes you feel the most comfortable. I think there's a lot of emotions going on, and I think people are just trying to wrap their head around everything. There's so much happening at once, and we're still also dealing with COVID-19. It's not like that's gone, even though we're not talking about it as much. That's still happening, and just adding another layer of emotions, and we were depleted already. So, I don't know.
Annmarie, can you share your own experience, what it's like for you at this moment?
Yeah, I've been, I feel like the key word for me has been listening and a lot of self-reflection. I have felt everything from anger to shame to hope. I feel hope as well. And the need to educate myself and to kind of listen, not to respond, listen to hear. Something I attended Amber's, a couple of us attended Amber's, your talk with Michelle the other day, your conversation. And something Michelle said, well, so much resonated for me, but something Michelle said came up when she said, something that she said during her prayer time was, help me to see things differently, or help me to see this differently.
Yeah.
And so I've been drawing upon that, not just thinking about what else I have to learn, but some of the things that I already think and feel, and help me to see it differently. And yes, putting yourself in the other person's point of view, but taking it deeper, just if that makes sense.
So the reason that Michelle and I did this, and that I thought that this was important for us to do, is because these conversations need to be had. Danny and I hopped on yesterday on Instagram Live, and I remember, I'm just thinking back to one of the questions that one of his community posed, and it was about, damned if you do, damned if you don't, kind of fear of shaming. If you speak up, what do you do? What do you say? And those conversations are had after we kind of get clear on our thoughts and decide like what role do we want to play in this? How do we feel about all of what's going on? You know, what the answer is going to be different for each of us. But the conversations to open up, to Michelle's point and what resonated with you, to open up the discussion to be had in safe spaces and understand others' opinions on each side, for everyone to understand each other without as much judgment, and just with an open ear and an open heart to really get closer to why this is all happening without shooting on people or putting our beliefs on other people. We're people having different experiences. And, you know, sometimes it can be hard to relate to someone who is so vastly different from you that you say, oh, you know, it's even like if you have an argument with a friend and you're telling another friend and you're like, she should have done this. And when she did this, I can't believe she did that. And it made me feel like this. And, you know, and you create these stories in your head about that other person. And when that person is further and further away, when there's less communication, you control the narrative. You tell yourself the story over and over again without really, you're making a lot of assumptions of what must be true based on what you know, but you don't know until you have the conversation. So I think these conversations are important, and I do encourage, I am lending myself to help give perspective. I know that, you know, I encourage people to talk to people that don't look like them, have conversations. And that's not always so easy. I get it that some of our circles are not as diverse as they could be. And I just I feel that a part of what I can do in all of this is helping to create spaces for people to understand each other better. So that's why I wanted to hop on and have this conversation with you all.
May I say a few words of how it's impacted our home and our lives and our world that we live in our family. My youngest daughter is a woman of color, and we have fostered and adopted children in our home since my older children, who are biological, have been very little themselves, 5 and under. And yet, you know, like Annmarie said, in all of our doings that we thought were really connected to African Americans, to all cultures, to all races, religions, we are now witnessing, you know, that aspect of I could have done better, I should have done more, as my youngest daughter struggles to find place, security, comfort, peace. And she's at that caught point of not knowing what direction to go. It's really hard to watch her struggling to where she feels she's not safe in the world, that she could be pulled over and thrown out of her car, and she's having a really tough time. So we're addressing that 1 minute, 1 moment at a time, and just giving her a lot of space to feel how she needs to feel, and knowing that we're there with her. And so one thing I would like to stress that I have found personally and professionally as part of what I do in inner city schools and with children of all walks is trauma awareness. That we are all in a state of trauma, some of us at higher levels. And there is actually a test you can take online called ACES, ACES, and you can go to that website and take trauma aware for your own sake. What level of trauma are you at? And imagine that the majority of people of color are considered a level 6 or higher. And so when you read that and you become aware of what the ACEs scale is, it does help you have a reference point of what people are going through that you may not even know.
Hi guys, my name is Mel. I want to thank you for having this forum. I'm not a professional in any way, and perhaps the oldest member of this group. And I would like to expand on what Amber said, because I am old enough to have been a part of the 60s civil rights movement. And I have had contact with some of those of us who are left from our group. And our main feeling right now, the trauma thing I think is great to address, but we are feeling such profound disappointment at where we have not reached in all this time. And part of it is there was all this activity and it was wonderful and it produced good results. And then those of us who stayed in some way, stayed in a minor way, stayed in the background, and we have to get back out there again. But what Amber said that is so true is that small is better. If one person connects with one other person, and that happens on a universal scale, we can accomplish something. It is the big groups and the big ideas and everything gets out of control and it's very corporate and it's all, you know, one-on-one, find one person. I'm in a group right now that is putting older people together with teenagers who are in trauma. Just one-on-one conversations, an older person with a younger person. Obviously it's a two-way street. I believe that. I think orphanages and old age homes are a perfect matchup and always have been. So old people and young people who can share something, skip a generation. You know, I'm not their parent. I might be their grandparents' age. Whatever it is that you're doing for yourself, do one more thing and connect with the person, as Amber said, from a different background. The more different, the better. It's why world travel is such a wonderful thing. People who travel, go to countries live with people of other cultures, come back changed and bring that change to this community. But one-on-one is really how we're going to conquer racism, which is, you know, purely a made-up thing.
Yeah, thank you for contributing and saying what you said, sharing what you shared. And it is special to have someone who participated in this back in the 60s. And, you know, I think one of the most frustrating comments that we get, I can't speak for, so I'd say I cannot speak for all people of color. I'm speaking for myself as one lens, because I really, one of the most painful things is being prejudged and lumped into this big group of folks, and we are all so very different. Yet something that I know is a trigger for a lot of us is that you're still upset about something that happened 300 years ago. And the trauma, as if it just, like 300 years ago, everything just stopped and life was just perfect after slavery and emancipation, and that life just changed all of a sudden overnight. And it was, you know, there's so much history that's there that I really, really encourage people to educate themselves about the civil rights movement, about everything that happened between the 1800s and the civil rights movement, and all of the history that's there that's uncomfortable to face. And it's uncomfortable to, you know, I saw a comment of a woman that said that she doesn't, how just terrible is it that her child would have to learn about slavery, that she doesn't want her child to know about slavery. That's like an awful thing to have to teach a child. And it's like, okay, but it happened and it's a part of our history. And so when you're not informed and when you don't understand all of what has happened, and you go and make a judgment, and then there's that social contagion of people just hearing and then repeating what it was that they heard. And, you know, that's how these stories get formed, in these, I think the lack of empathy and compassion and understanding, it occurs in that way when we do not connect to each other, ask each other questions, have one-on-one conversations to start. They can grow larger, but start in a safe space, talking to someone and letting them feel safe enough to answer you with honesty, and not discounting any of what they're saying and not challenging it, but just listening. So much power can come from that. And I'm not just putting it on one side. We need to listen to each other. But I think as people of color, we often understand white people or non-people of color more because we learn your history. We're 13% of this country, but so many of the rooms that we're in, we're the only one. And so we know you much better than you know us. And we can't know all of you individually. So I would be blanketing by saying that, but we're taught the history. There's so many more conversations and understanding from our end that happens because of schools, and that's what they teach. You know, you don't get the same. Has anyone learned Caribbean history in school? Did anyone learn anything about all the amazing things that happened in the Caribbean? Wait, we can't hear you, Miss Warner. Can you turn yourself, take your mute off?
I was a history major, so yes. And I went to Mississippi and taught Black children Black history because there was no Black history in there. It just, they did not exist. History was the history of white people.
Yeah.
Those lucky enough to go to school had no idea about the people who had come before them, that had fought in the revolution, who were here, who had worked it didn't exist. So yes, that is absolutely necessary. I don't know how many of you watched the service for George Floyd, but the thing that touched me the most was his brother's description of how they grew up. It was a small encapsulated story of a family of a lot of children and how their mother raised them and what they did every day and how they approached their life and their relationships with one another. And I hope it educated people a little bit. It was beautiful. But we don't know these things.
And especially when the images that we get are the images that are on the media, and when we see people looking portrayed in just the worst of ways. I applaud. There was a gentleman, there's a reporter named Kayong. I can't remember her last name, but she's a CNN reporter. And she talked to a young man in the DC protest who spoke about why he was there. And I posted it on my social media page because what I talked about prejudging, all those protesters are thugs. It hurts to be prejudged no matter who you are. It hurts to be assumed that you're nothing or less than, or you're gonna hurt someone just because of how you look. And it could have nothing to do with who you actually are. But some of the reason that people make those assumptions or prejudgments is because when that's all that they see, when they're not in the communities, like you, Ms. Warner, when they're not in the schools, or when they're not in the communities, or when they don't have friends of color, or when they don't support programming with people of color in it, there's such a narrow view on who we are that it's easy to make us other and to say, well, they deserve that. And that's where the bias comes in, and that's where the unconscious bias and the insensitivities come in that really get dangerous, and a part of how, everything that happened in Nazi Germany and Hitler is like the otherness of people allows you to validate why it's okay to do things to them or not to care about them. But it's really an us problem. This is an us problem. This is a huge problem in the Black community, but it should be a problem to everyone, to anyone who is human with a heart. It's a problem. And the timing of it all.
The timing really is crappy. Really is
crappy, but in a way, not, because when we're able to go back to our comfort zone, then when you marched in the 60s, what progress have we made? We got comfortable again, and we went back to our comfort zone, and we stopped standing up, and we stopped protesting, and we stopped using our voice, and we stopped having conversations, and we got comfortable and thought everything was okay, especially when it's not in your face, especially when you're not getting pulled over, beaten, don't know family members who've suffered from injustice and things, and we can get, or individuals can get comfortable and then the change goes by the wayside, and here we are again. So it is not the most opportune timing, but people don't have the distractions that they normally have that would put them back in their comfort zone. And that can be a good thing or a bad thing.
There's something called unintended consequences, which we all know and deal with all the time. So no, it isn't an optimal time, but it is the time. It's the time we've gotten, the time we have, and we need to make the most of it.
And I don't know if we were comfortable in the 60s. I remember having a great deal of discomfort, even as a small child, seeing, first of all, living within a community where I couldn't see brown and black faces, which I commented often as to why one of my classmates, Grace, was the only person in our community who was of color. And my mother had no words for it. She just didn't know why. Well, I don't think we were comfortable. I mean, not everybody. I think there was a status quo, but for those of us who were already regulating in terms of, I want to be a part of the greater good, and where are the other people? And I also think that there were other riots going on there. Our attention was being taken to war times in Vietnam. And so it was a matter of, well, what's the biggest bomb in the room? And as far as this time, I see racial injustice as a virus. I see it as a plague. I see it as, I see it as matching energy with the virus we have. So of course it's here.
Right, but people, some of the more prominent people in the movement went on.
Right.
I was lucky enough, because he's the hero of my life, to meet John Lewis. And John Lewis is the most extraordinary person, and he has, through his life, worked. So have others. But it was in a different way. And when it wasn't in people's faces anymore, as you said, there was war, there were other things, times change. But we lost sight of how important it is to keep it in front of people's faces. And now we're reminded again. But it wasn't Eric Garner. It took another one. And believe me, there were how many in between? The woman who hanged herself for being arrested, every single day. And I said, people say to me, oh boy, you really understand. Well, I understand, but I am not Black. And I will never, ever know what it's like to walk down the street and be afraid of a cop, or send my child out without warning him or her about what to look out for. It's a different reality. I come close, I think, in my feeling and who I am, but I'm not that person. And I can't, it's not on a visceral level. So, and I'm pretty evolved in that way. So all those people who are not, who have never bothered to really think about it, oh, I'm not a racist, and then they'll do something that they don't even realize is racist. Mm-hmm. Those are the people that are the scariest, because those are the people that are the hardest to convince. The guy who says something nasty is a nasty person, and he'll admit it, I don't like it. The person who says, no, I'm not racist, and won't send his child to a mixed school because, oh, there's a better one down the street who happens to be all white, and doesn't even realize that. Those are the people that we need to get to. And that's subtle, and that's more difficult. And that's why I say, have a friend, or take time with someone who you know is kind of like borderline, another white person who's borderline, if you're white, and take them places, take them to mixed groups, take them to someone's home. It's experience that changes people, not intellect.
Yeah.
I just want to add that we are, of course, live, and we have a lot of different opinions and viewpoints and perspectives, people who may be watching or people in the group. And I want to make sure that we remember to keep this a safe space, and that we don't talk about any labels of any groups of people, and that we speak about our own experience and not make assumptions about what other people are experiencing or what they're like. And I think that that is something that can help this collectively because when we speak in terms of this is what I'm experiencing and here's what it's like for me, then other people can hear that and can relate on an empathetic level and can say, wow, I didn't realize that you are having that experience. And if somebody is experiencing trauma, of course, if somebody's traumatized, their brain wiring is in a different situation, and it will be different for them to express themselves than somebody who is not traumatized. And so we have to be conscious of how we listen to them, which is quite different from the way that we interact with somebody who is not traumatized. You know, and everybody can have trauma from many different places. We can't assume, you know, we can't make assumptions. So if somebody is making choices that we would instinctively judge as being racist, I think, you know, in my experience, it's very difficult to keep those reactions down, right? To keep your immediate instinct from that. And I've been seeing a lot of comments, of having a lot of conversations on social media where people are very reactive. And I get very angry. I get really angry. And I want to say things back that are like a one-up, like, oh yeah, well, I'm going to get you on this. But I think a better reaction is just to ask a question and say, what do you mean by that? And you know, what do you think of this? And if I understand what you're saying correctly, you're saying this, and just reflecting back, because then you can have a more civil discourse, and the person you're interacting with might ask a question of themselves, and that frustration that they're feeling that is causing them to make any particular statement or decision might be just, you know, paused for just a moment. So I have a question, which is related to a question that somebody was bringing up on Facebook, and that is, you know, and again, I'm asking this question openly, and I hope that it'll be received that way. What is the role of personal choice when it comes to overcoming societal pressure, societal limits? Let's see, how can I say this more bluntly? Some people think and believe that that to overcome racism, we just have to make better choices as individuals. If you are given, you know, a chance to do something right or wrong, it's your choice. You know, if you're going to be a criminal, you can choose to do it or to not do it. If you're going to choose violence, that's just your choice. And there's a lot of people with somebody else is joining. With the viewpoint that all of the reactions to what's going on are overblown, because in the end, you know, we should just be making better choices.
Who's the we? And we should just be making better choices.
Everybody, but in particular, I think the criticism, you know, is people of color, Black people. I'm speaking as a, you know, from devil's advocate kind of point of view, and I just want to express that point of view because I've seen it, you know, and I just want to have a conversation about it. I think that people who make those comments are often attacked immediately, but if we look at that and hold on to it for a second and explain our perspective on it in a way that is caring, what that might be like.
So can we start with you and ask you what is your perspective? Because I'm just honoring what you said about wanting us to just give it from our perspective. I'm an obvious person to answer, but I would love to hear your perspectives on that.
Okay, thanks. So I made a little video for my family yesterday with Rebby. Private video that we sent to our family because our parents have kind of a different perspective on things because they're immigrants, Jewish immigrants, coming from very different cultural backgrounds and upbringings and societal norms. So when we have conversations with them, they didn't have like American history in school. They had, South American or European or Jewish history. And so I go into like trying to make a comparison between, a very imperfect comparison between like, what would it have been like for Jewish people in the Spanish Inquisition if they had never had the choice to leave Spain, and if they all looked different. Just trying to explain to people who don't have the same cultural background and put it into their own context. Mm-hmm. That African Americans are still living in the place with the same culture that removed all of their identity and culture and made them slaves. Mm-hmm. And all of the institutions.
We had no choice. Mm-hmm.
There was no choice. Mm-hmm. It was just, being torn from your roots, mm-hmm. removed altogether, and basically erased all of that. And the only thing left is your history of slavery and the way you look. And you're still in that place. It's like, the Israelites still being in Egypt. Like they had never been freed. They were just, the laws changed in Egypt and everyone's still there. But like the Egyptians still know who you are, Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I was just trying to make that comparison. Because I think that when people assume that it's just about personal choice, there's a very complex environmental factor that impacts personal choice. Mm-hmm. Lots and lots of generational trauma that can impact personal choice. It's not like we're all on the same page and we can all just make the same choices equally.
And lots of things, we don't have as many choices. Have you guys seen the cartoon about Jamal?
Yeah.
I encourage you to watch it. And that talks about the redlining and how neighborhoods were set up and African Americans not being able to get homes in nice areas or get mortgages at all. So we were put into areas that were lower income together. Even if we could afford to be outside of them, we had no choice. Our children went to schools that were not as good and were not as funded, had no choice. There were no choices. The law has not been on our side to give us the same amount of choices. And we're still affected by that to this day because George Floyd had no choice but to lay there while for 9 minutes pleading. He couldn't breathe. He didn't have the choice to breathe. So someone could say he had the choice to use the counterfeit $20 bill. But I would ask you, Danny, if you used a counterfeit $20 bill, do you think you would die for it?
No, of course not.
Right. So the weight of the choices, it's just when people say that, it's like almost like I can't really get upset with them because they're just have no concept. They just really don't understand. It is upsetting, but I know that it's just ignorance. And I don't say that in the way of judgment, but what is ignorance? It's not knowing and not being educated about something. So I know that there's just no understanding because the choices, yes, there are choices that we can all make to be better, but to say that we as a people need to make better choices when we have less choices, when we have more fear, when we have more, and not fear that's not, okay, I live in a really nice house with a rooftop view of New York City. I live in a great neighborhood. I have a daughter. My husband is an aerospace engineer, a rocket scientist. I'm a business owner. I have a daughter who I still have to have discussions with her at 8 years old about police brutality, about people being killed. I don't have the choice anymore to let her be a child and just be naive and free in and of herself to not be burdened by these troubles of the world as an 8-year-old because she shouldn't be, but I don't have a choice because of what's going on right now. We got pulled over and my daughter had a panic attack. And I started crying too, because she was upset. And the officer looked at me like I had done something wrong. And I said, she's afraid of you. She's not afraid of me. I'm a fantastic mother. She loves me. We've had conversations about this. But a part of the reason that she's afraid is because she thinks because we got pulled over that we might die. Even here in Edgewater, New Jersey, in the burbs, we can't get away from it. We have no choice. Yes, I have other choices and I do make great choices, but to should on someone and not know they should do this, they should do that, they should make better choices is a lack of empathy, compassion, understanding, knowledge, consideration, just like your head is in the dirt and you don't really know what's going on when you make comments like that. And so pardon me if that sounds like a judgment, but I'm responding to something that is a big trigger for me. So that's my answer.
Amber, that is heartbreaking. Absolutely heartbreaking. I think one of the differences this time is that there's a focus on policing. Policing, not really a focus in the past. In fact, I don't know how many people know what the purpose of the March on Washington was when Dr. King spoke. Does anybody know? That was not about integration. That was about jobs. That march was about jobs because the community said, if I can get a good job and I can have the money to buy a house in a good community, send my kids to school, that was what it was about. Now it's focused on the speech, which was magnificent. And so people forget that. It was about jobs. And the various areas that were addressed during that time. Policing was not, now that is in the forefront, and maybe police forces will be cleaned up because that is the beginning of agony for so many people. One can only hope. So I think that's a little bit of a different focus right now, which I find very encouraging.
Mel,
Plus,
I would like to just interrupt for 1 second, and because we have a limited amount of time. So if you want to comment, let's try to bottom line what are we trying to say? And I spoke for a long time and I'm totally guilty of this. I wish we could talk forever though. So much we can say, but okay. So to summarize, from what I understand, something that from what I took away from Amber, there are environmental factors. There's very real fear based on the way that police and society behaves, so that people of color have to educate their children about these realities because they have to watch out for them. These are very real dangers, and unfortunately can't be just naive that children behave because it's dangerous out there. And so they have to be educated, right? And I was saying, Mel, right? Is that your name? Yeah. Okay. That the focus previously used to be on other issues, and now it's particularly about policing and police brutality, which is that correct? Am I summarizing that correctly?
I think it's a hard thing to summarize. On my end, there's so much more that we didn't, I don't think that fully represented. It's not just about our choices, it's about us as people making better choices and caring about the choices that are made, even if they don't affect us. So if I could broaden it out, because it's so much larger than just the choices of our children, and it's compact. It's a lot to discuss in an hour. So I'll stand with that as the bottom line, but I'll just say that there's so much more.
And I would like to respond because I agree with what Amber's saying, and it is not just persons of color who are explaining this to their children. It's even those who are Caucasian who have children of color and are not as well telling our children that when you go to the mall, make sure they can always see your hand. In the schools I teach, instructing students in resiliency and mindfulness processes so they aren't killed on the street, so that their behaviors that are just fun and just, are asking them to come to a place of deeper peace than the world out there is in order for them to be safe. I think that also is happening, and that I'm not marginalizing anything that Amber's saying. It's just everyone who has a child of color is having conversations, hopefully, in order to protect them.
So just going back to what Ms. Warner said also, we as a people for years have wanted to make better choices and not been allowed to. We've not had the same opportunities for years and years and years and years and years, and then we're laid out and our children are now being killed. So now we're mama cubs, and we're like, wait a minute. So we don't have opportunity. We can't do this. And then there's this desperation within the community of people that have no other choice. What do people do when they're desperate? Let's talk about it from a positive psychology point of view. What do people do when they're desperate? When it's fight or flight? We live in a state of fight or flight. And it's not because it's our choice to, because there are a lot of, I know so many talented people who made bad choices because they had no other choice, but I knew them when they wanted to make good choices. And it's heartbreaking to see them go down the wrong road because they didn't have other choices, because they couldn't live in a house that equity could go up, for them to have the same amount of wealth, for them to go to college, pay for it, afford to go to a good school, be educated, and have more choices of what they could even do to make money. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If your basic needs are not met, you can't help other people. So, oh, help your brother, your people, you guys pull yourself up by your bootstraps, help your fellow brother. There are people that can't help themselves. They can't help somebody else. They're still trying to get food on their tables when they work 3 jobs and they try hard, but they've been discriminated against. There are so many people who want to make better choices. And so help them make better choices by voting. Help them make better choices by educating people, and not just them over there, they make bad choices and that's their fault. That is so twisted and insensitive that I just cannot leave that where it is. It pisses me off to the core, and I'm just gonna say it. I'm just gonna own it, because it's the attitude like that that makes this continue. And if we could just go back to where we came from and make our own laws, if we had not just been plucked, we weren't, here's the thing, here's the myth that Blacks were sold by Blacks into slavery and we were just over there just rolling in the dirt. No, there are Wakandas of Africa that people don't know about because the media doesn't cover them. And I have actually quite a few millionaire African friends who are doing very, very well, who look at us and they're like, have the conversation between Africans and African Americans. That's a whole other discussion. And it's another set of choices, because you're living in a land where when your police force looks like you, when your government looks like you, then they understand you more and you have better choices, which is a part of why I asked about what we know about Caribbean history. If you look at the islands, the Caribbean islands, and you look at the wealth that's there, when you look at the government that's there, there's a different dynamic that's happening there than what we're experiencing here in the United States. And especially with quarantine, we can't just go back anywhere. So us living here is now inconveniencing people because we're rioting, or because we're passionate, or because we're upset, or we should have made better choices. And that's just such an insensitive way to look at it.
Yeah. So we have someone in the group, Anna, who has some questions, and I want to make sure that she has a chance. I think she's been writing privately to me by accident. You have to switch to if you go in the drop-down list, there's you see all the names and everyone.
You can also unmute yourself and turn your camera on if you like. There you are.
Okay, there she is, yeah.
Yeah.
I think you have to rotate your device.
Yeah, up. That's better?
That's better, yeah.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Anna.
Hi.
I have very interesting background. I'm from St. Petersburg, Russia, but I live in Brooklyn right now. And I lived in various countries. So I lived in China, I lived in Venezuela, France, Thailand. So it gave me pretty huge cultural experience living in all those places. And what my mind now is questioning, it's also the subject of choice. How do we make it? Because there is a very huge difference between the timeline of 60s and the current timeline, because we have internet, we have way more opportunities to educate ourselves, and that's why I'm asking. So if back then people might have no choice of educating themselves better and like getting more information about their rights, their opportunities, so what stops them from doing it right now? And why don't people work on themselves, don't starting from the inside, making their neighborhoods look better, cleaner, like nicer, develop their own their community and their districts? Because what I've seen in China and in Russia and in Thailand too, in a very poor areas, people make better choices with developing what they have. So what stops people from doing it right now?
Amber, do you want to answer? Okay.
Yeah, but they don't have laws set up against them to design for them to fail. Their communities also support them, and so they care more about how their communities look. They don't. When you're in China and you're Chinese, you're not dealing with a system that has been set up for failure of you from day one, that doesn't even respect you as an entire human. So I think that would be the major difference. The choices are not as broad. We're in the communities. There are a lot of people who are taking care of their spaces. There are communities there are people within the communities whose, if you walked inside of their homes, you would see that they took care of their spaces. If they can take care of their whole communities, no, but the nice communities have street sweepers and have taxes that go into making them look nice. And it's not that each individual person within a nicer community, it's like the area that I live in, I'm not outside cleaning the street.
But who drops the garbage on the street? Who drops the garbage on the street? Who puts the paints on the walls? That is my question. So it's coming from the inside, from education, from like your own desire to develop something, to like start working harder, to work your way up. Because like I cannot imagine for example, Mr. Obama like throwing around garbage. It doesn't appears on the street itself. It's about people who live in the community.
But so which communities are we talking about? Because there are people there, so there are communities of color with garbage and spray paint, and there are communities of non-color or white communities.
Like let's take as an example Flatbush, like East Flatbush. It looks way different from their neighbors around Prospect Park, for example. And the difference is that like people create maybe less garbage. That's what I'm trying to say. Like where it's coming from.
So with Danny's request earlier, can we bottom line that? So because what's your bottom line?
So where is the origins of the problem? They're inside, or it's everything goes from the outside? And like why people blame like the outside problems on their own choices? It will be always your choice to take the rock or to drop it or leave it on its place.
Yeah, that's not true here, unfortunately. But I would love to use this as a space of like what would happen if I wasn't here, and leave someone else to respond to that comment.
Mm-hmm. Because also I will give example from China. The Uyghurs, it's part of Chinese community. They're repressed now, and it's horrible things are going with them. and even worse than you can imagine, because you will not see those things in media.
Okay, well, there are things that are worse than you can imagine because you're not seeing them in media either. Annmarie, you were going to say something?
I do, and in the spirit of what Danny was asking before, that we speak from you know, our own experience. Part of what I've been trying to do in listening and reading and kind of being more active in my own education is to learn, and I never fully understood systemic racism. I understood it on a different type of level, not systemic. Systemic is the operative word, I think, for me in my own current education right now, because I always, you know, I come from a place of love. I love people of all races and colors, and sometimes things seem like they're simpler than they are. And I think the thing with George Floyd is that it is so, everybody's united in the idea that even if you were to take color out of it, which you shouldn't, but even if you were, from a human standpoint, what the cop did was just abhorrent, and everybody agrees on that. And so everybody's saying, well, you know, obviously that was wrong, so let's move on. And it's not that simple, because what's come from this is all these discussions about how did we get to this place? And from my own personal experience, I remember just a few years ago, Eric Gardner, Michael Brown, things like that. And I remember being outraged then. And I remember saying how outraged I was, but I didn't do anything about it other than express my outrage. And that's on me. I did not, you know, I did not say, well, where could this have come from? What could we do? Like, I didn't follow it. And then what happens? Everything goes back to the status quo. And so I think, Ms. Warner, when you were saying also, like, you know, everybody has to do their own work, and there could be subtle shifts that have huge impacts. I'm trying to figure out what my shifts are and to take ownership of that. And I think when we all collectively do that, and somebody else's shift is going to be different than my shift. You know, people are less further along on the path. People are way far ahead of me on the path. But I think as long as we stay on the path and we're talking like this, and we can say, but wait, that doesn't make sense. It didn't make sense to me. But I'm trying to figure out, what don't I know? Because when we're educated, we can do better. And that's my personal standpoint. I have so much to learn, and I understand that, and I'm not going to learn it in 5 minutes, but I can commit to learning. And so
I'd like to speak to Anna and on that topic. And I'm sorry, I'm not trying to cut you off, Annmarie. Anna, I'd like to answer why people don't take care of things or fix it themselves, because I want you to know that I can only speak from working with children in inner city schools and in poverty. And part of that poverty is their stress level and this overwhelming feeling of, why should I do this? Nothing ever changes. And when people do not see a purpose, they go inward and just lose joy, lose the ability to think that anything they do will become anything positive. And so I think it is this downward spiral of nothing will ever change because I've never seen any change. And I think that's why people don't exert themselves when they don't know how. And some of the basic things that you or I don't know how you grew up, may have grown up with, were not given to them, were not offered to them, were not options. So that's what I think is that they've lost purpose. They've lost the ability to see what you commonly see is from your own lens.
Yeah, and we don't want to look at people in Flatbush, New York, and make a general statement about all African Americans, because that would be blanket statementing, and we're not all the people who are in your community.
So my statement about Flatbush is mostly about the district, and the cleanness of the district itself than about the people. And also the thing is that there is always choice between easy way and complicated way, because a lot of people made the way up without any help out of nowhere, educating themselves, work themselves. Because New York is the salad bowl of different nations. A lot of people coming to work here from every part of the world. And a lot of them had nothing way back then in their homes, and they worked their way up. And having an internet and having like a lot of successful stories when people were starting from the scratch and were not falling down the wrong roads, give you the choice of which path to choose yourself. Because look at the Obama family. Did you watch the Michelle Obama story movie where she grew up, how she grew up? It is a great example of the woman working her way up.
Can I jump in for a second, if that's okay? All right. So there. I think first of all, it's 2 o'clock. So if anybody had to go, I know we said this is going to be from 1 to 2 o'clock. So if you have to go, no problem. Rebecca, I think you said you have a meeting. So yeah, totally cool. Just want to like zoom out for a second. It sounds like we're talking about a debate, which, you know, if you've studied a bit of psychology, talking about this debate that is about whether, like, how much control do people have in life, essentially? Is it all just personal choice, or are there other factors, right? And so what we know is that there are a lot of factors, a lot of psychological factors, environmental factors, that contribute to the way that people think, feel, and behave. So when this is also a question of American history. So when you study American history and you sort of understand the patterns that have taken place over many years, and you see the way that those societal issues affect the individual, and you also understand that an individual is only able to make choices based on not just complete isolation and their own motivation, but also a lot of factors that weigh and influence that person's ability to make choice as an individual, and also the societal constraints around that choice, as Amber was saying. So even if a person was the most positive, intelligent, capable, motivated, focused individual in the world, such as, I don't know, Michelle Obama, many people like that are still not able to transcend the societal limitations because of all of this American history that we're talking about. So even given a perfect situation where the ultimate superhuman can make all of the best choices and motivate themselves and just be the best, there are very, very strong societal environmental factors. And this is, in a way, very unique to the history of the United States. I mean, this may, you know, appear in other cultures in other parts of the world too, but we're talking about what it is in America for Black people in the United States. So I think it's important to ask the question of not just like, what does this one person, what can they do in this moment, but what are all of the factors that are pushing and pulling this individual that can allow them to even have free will and have choice in a society that, you know, in this case, is very restricting to certain groups of people. Anyone else?
Yeah, so for me, the most important thing is when you hold it here, a social security number, a working permit, you have the original right to work your way up. And if there are a lot of cases when people.
You really, Anna, Miss Warner, I'm sorry, pardon me. Anna, you've had a lot of time to speak. Miss Warner, I'm gonna ask you to please address her because I see you shaking your head and I would like for you to share some perspective. Anna, I really feel that you don't get it and we can't fix that right now in the next couple of minutes that we have, but I really wanna invite you to broaden your perspective because I think you get it, but you really are looking at this much of it and it's a lot bigger than that. So I'm not attacking you, but I'm encouraging you and I'm inviting you to broaden your perspective.
Okay. Thank you.
Mel, were you going to say something? And,
yeah, I just felt like we cut. Is it Mel? Is your name Mel or is it?
Yes, Mel, I realized you were calling me Miss Warner. I thought it was because of my age and you're so polite, but my name isn't
this
up
is
there.
M.
Right?
Warner.
It says M. Warner. So yeah, but both. But I felt like we cut you off in the middle of making a really good statement. And I think that there's perspective that could be shared. Hearing it from me will feel like it's defense. Hearing it from someone else could feel like it's more or relating or expanding. So I'm going to try to park my feedback that I would very passionately give if we had more time and ask if you would like the time to address anything that Anna said or just finish the thoughts that you were making earlier.
And Mel, if you don't mind, if you can speak, raise your volume or bring it a bit closer so we can hear you clearly.
Oh, sorry about that. I thought I had it up as high as I could make it. Can you hear me? Am I Verizon? Okay, positive Verizon. Anna, the only thing, and I will address you directly because that Social Security card is a number, and yes, there are certain benefits. Your face when you go in to apply for that job is your face. And the person opposite you, interviewing you or who considering you for a job, comes with built-in feelings about who you are. Danny was talking about Spain. A lot of them could assimilate. You know, you can change your name, you can change a lot of things. If you have a black face, you can't change that. There are many light-skinned blacks that passed at one point, and it's understandable, but basically Amber can't pass. She is who she is. So they did some organization, I'm sure some of you know about it. Anna, maybe you need to know about it. They did a program which they sent resumes to companies where they put a seemingly white name, John Smith, or they put a Tanya, somebody, a seemingly black name, same exact qualifications, and they saw what the result was. And the result was totally unbalanced. People who had black sounding names just did not get called back. An organization sent teams into banks to apply for loans. 2 white people, 2 black people, same exact background. They came with the same credentials, except their faces. And the blacks were rejected. So your idea that because people are born in this wonderful country, and there's a lot of wonderful things about this country, a lot of wonderful ideals about this country, that people are exactly the same here, treated the same here, is just a misconception. I'm sorry. I think you perhaps need to broaden your perspective a little bit. It's not, I'm sorry, it's not a personal attack, but I think that you have a very limited perspective. And I think if you listen to Amber and what she said about her life and her child and what she faced, look up redlining. Go and Google the term redlining. If you do nothing but that after this conversation, you will understand a little bit more about what we're talking about.
Does anybody have that link to the video about that you guys were talking about? It's a cartoon, and it shows like the housing and redlining. If you do, please share it.
Thank you. I've actually heard about these researches with job applying and credit opportunities for the credit loans. Yeah, it's horrible, and that's why now they have like this diversity program, as far as I got, when like you need to see like what is diversity of the employees in the company. and those researches they were like before they started that program.
This is not a new program. The joke used to be when I was hiring people that if I hired a Black female handicapped nun, I would take care of all the diversity, you know, for the month in my country. So this is not new. It is still human beings who are administering these things. And that's why we have to do our one-on-one, why we have to educate each individual, especially those people who have power over the lives of other people.
I'm really glad we're talking about this, because I think that what Anna's bringing up is also a perspective that many people have, and I think that what it comes down to is education. Honestly, that when you understand the experience that Black people have in this country, then perhaps you can toggle, you can change the way that you view all of this perspective. And you don't make assumptions about why the situation is that it is. And I think that I used to have viewpoints on this that were just ignorant, and that essentially, because I grew up in somewhat of a bubble, I didn't understand. I just didn't learn. And the more I've learned, and I've read about it and been exposed to it and had conversations, the more I understand that that a lot of what is said is based on assumptions and a lack of understanding about what systemic racism actually is.
And to your point, Danny, and thank you, Mel, for sharing, but to your point, that's the time when you need to listen more than you talk, and not just defend what you think you know because you think you get it, and continuing to go and just defend your point of view without listening to the other point of view is a part of where the danger is. And I would encourage us all to listen more than we talk, at least more than half the time.
Red, you had something you wanted to offer.
Yeah, just so everybody has a background of who I am, because not everybody knows me. My name is Sarah Labonte. I go by Red for obvious reasons. I live in New York City. I have traveled around and lived in multiple cities around the country, including Seattle, Portland, and Chicago, and Boston. I grew up in a predominantly white middle-class community in New Hampshire. And I had to, in the course of my life, I had the opportunity and am grateful to have been re-educated about the stories that I was being told about what was going on in our country. And specifically as a white female coming from the middle-class family, was not, the information that I was getting was bias and incorrect to the facts of history. It was not my friend's responsibility to educate me, though they were gracious enough to do that. I work primarily in restorative justice and gender neutrality communities, and that's where I was educated about this. So there is something to be said for what is taught to the community, and where there is one side that is often taught, and those are the sides of the victors. Those are the sides of the oppressors. It's not the voice of the people who are being oppressed. That goes through history. What's happening right now and what we're seeing is a continuation and hopefully the transformation of a system that starts with education, starts with means, starts with opportunity, but also starts with some reparation. There has been systematic repression of people since we have landed on this continent. Started with the Indian, the American Indians that were here, the indigenous people, and continued when we, and not me personally, but when me, someone who looked like me, went over and took people away in order to make them into property. And we are in a system right now that is developing, and we as a human race are developing into who we say we want to be. And part of that is correcting some of the injustices, not because we have to, but because it's the responsible thing to do. And it's going to take people like you and I educating ourselves so that we can be responsible, not because we have to, but because that's what's going to actually have power. It's going to be somebody like me because maybe I have a little bit more of a voice, opening the floor and then stepping back and having someone else's voice come through. Not that it makes me lesser than, but it allows somebody else to come up and actually be heard with equality. There's been atrocities that have been happening. There is what's called a blue line, and I have friends of mine who are high up in the police force, that up until pretty much the last 5 to 7 years, the blue line, the blue wall of silence is what it was called, was internally, they would not reprimand racist police officers. They wouldn't do it. They would not hold them to account because they were behind the blue line. That's not BS. They know this. They know that there still are racist cops within their precincts, and they are now starting to realize that it's not workable to do that because it's out of alignment with what they say they are up to. And it, quite frankly, the time is up. It's been 60, not, so it was 69, so it's been 40, 50, 60 years now. Doesn't work any longer. And the majority of us, the tipping point of us, are finally saying enough is enough. And we have a person in power at the penultimate place of power in our country who is verbally encouraging violence against a group of people who are standing for equality because of an unjust system. And those of us get the opportunity to say, no, you may be a person in power, but you don't speak for all of us. Does that make sense? And I just want to tone check myself, you guys, because as someone who is white, I want to make sure that what I said actually wasn't deaf. So if somebody could provide that, I would appreciate it, because I also can learn. And I love you.
We have a whole bunch of questions on Facebook, comments on Facebook that I think would be nice to just acknowledge.
Can I ask like also the question related to something that was Red saying before we start the Facebooks?
No, at the moment, I think we need to switch over because we're limited on time. Thank you for sharing, Doana.
I'm gonna message you directly, Anna, so you can message me.
Okay, so I'm just trying to scroll through. If somebody could help me with this, I'd appreciate it because I'm trying to multitask.
Yeah, Danny, I don't have Facebook up because I didn't want the echo, so I'm not,
okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Which post is it on, Danny? I'll look.
I think it's on Amber's Amber's live feed.
Okay.
Oh, I do. Okay, no, I do. I have comments here. Yeah. So.
Okay. I see a lot of comments. I'm not seeing actually any questions. And if you want to just read the comments, you can go on and scroll through and read them. I added the video about the systemic racism, that cartoon, which I think is really well done. That's in our chat. It's also in the Facebook chat. If anybody wants to read that, Christine Ciervo posted it.
Yes, thank you, Christine.
Okay.
Red, just Shahira, who is my spiritual godmother, says, thank you, Red. It matters that you understand. Christine, who is my, we worked together. She was my assistant for years down in Florida. She said, thank you, Red. And the Joy, another dear soul to me, as saying, absolutely. And so I have to pull up the other comments. Those are the only ones that I can see right now, and I'm trying to pull them up. But it's important that our voices be heard. It's important, Anna, even that you bring up questions like that, and that you be open to listening and receiving the answers, because we're not going to make progress if we don't address the uncomfortable places, if we don't have the uncomfortable conversations. So as triggering as that was, I think it's important that we were able to have the discussion, and I hope that you will, and welcome you to continue to have more discussions, because when you hear more voices, the one voice that you hear or the fewer voices that you see start to just be a small representation of the large number of voices that are out there. I don't ever want to be prejudged that I don't clean up around my house, that I don't, whatever things that you can assume about people because you see some people doing it. That's not me as a person. And there's a lot of Black excellence out there, but if you're not around it, then you don't really see it. I wouldn't walk into a trailer park and go, all of America is like this. I wouldn't walk into the White House and go, all of America is like this. There's such a vast diversity of people, and the fewer that you see that you use to make a generalization, the more you're limiting yourself to really getting the bigger picture. And I'm not just speaking to you, I'm speaking to all of us. I have to hop off in a bit, guys. I welcome you guys to continue the conversation, but I do have an appointment at 2:30, so I won't be able to stay on much longer.
Amber, are you using your Zoom account for the next conversation? In other words, do we have to shut this down?
I am, but I can use another. I have a couple of Zoom accounts, so it's fine. You guys can continue here, and I'll hop on one of my others.
Okay. Well, maybe we can set a finishing time, because this is the kind of thing that could go on forever, and at some point we need to break. So let's say 2:45, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Annmarie, you popped up.
I did.
Oh, you unmuted yourself.
I did. No, I'm just thinking a lot about what everybody's saying. I'm trying to come from a place of listening and learning. From a positive psychology standpoint, we also want to remember it's okay to be uncomfortable, and we should be uncomfortable. I can tell you that, my daughter shared with me that she's felt very uncomfortable with everything that's going on, and she expressed a lot of things. And I said, that's good. I never want you to be in pain, but that's good. Because if you're not feeling something in this time, you're not listening, or you're not allowing yourself to listen. And so we're feeling this large range of emotions. And, to quote Mr. Rogers, all emotions are mentionable. And when you can mention them, this is not the exact quote, they become more manageable, because we can have these kinds of conversations. And it's hard to sit in that place of discomfort. It's hard to sit in that place of vulnerability, and it's hard to sit in that place of shame in certain cases. And we're confused. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of fear, and some of that is coming from the very real things that are going on, and some of that is coming from the very real misinformation that is being spread, sometimes unintentionally and sometimes extremely intentionally, and clouding the issues. And so we don't want to lose sight of what's going on, because we have to sift through all of that. And it's not anybody else's job to educate us, although we are grateful when people can, obviously, but I'm sitting in my discomfort, and I am uncomfortable. and and I'm emotional. It comes up. Amber and Danny and Rebecca, who had to leave, they know this came up for me the other day. Comes and it goes. I mean, it doesn't go, but I can manage it a little better in the moment sometimes. But, I'm allowing myself to have that. And everybody's also going to act and react in their own way based on a lot of different factors. So I myself am glad for everything that comes up in these kinds of spaces, because I don't think we have enough of these spaces in which we can express ourselves. And go ahead, I'm sorry. Mel.
Thank you. Annmarie, thank you for expressing that. And I have, before I go, I'm going to send in the chat and ask Danny or one of you guys to share. I have a list of things that you can do. So for those of you who are saying, what can I do? I've been compiling a list, and I will put a link that you can download a presentation from my Dropbox, and it has where you can donate, organizations you can research, petitions you can sign, and people that you can follow to help to educate yourself and understand this a bit better. So I'm going to share that, and I am going to hop off in a couple minutes, but thanks for us having this conversation. Yeah.
Amber, can you give me permission to use the chat, because I'm not able to use the chat for some reason?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah, I'll
Thank
do that. Okay.
Yeah, I'll be sure to share that as well through the CAP 57 Red.
Thank you, Danny.
And anywhere else, I can just post it.
Thank you. Amber, do we have permission to post that to other communities?
Yeah, share it. Sure, please. I want as many people to have it as possible. I actually think I can share it in here. So I'm going to try to do that before I hop off, since I have another couple of minutes.
Great. I have to hop off. I've got a 2:30 that I'm leading. Anna, did you get my email address in the chat?
Yeah, I get it. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Guy, for the conversation. I'm sad I wasn't there from the beginning, but I'm gonna watch it later, because there are a lot of things that I still have questions, and I want people to educate me about certain questions, especially when it comes to the numbers and the statistics that, for example, police reports having right now, because I still don't get how certain things possible and how certain things works.
Yeah, and Anna, the other thing I would really recommend is talk to people. Statistics are wonderful to a point, but they don't get the humanity of what's going on. So I would recommend statistics, fantastic, but go and actually have conversations with people. It'll really make a difference for you.
Right. Yeah.
And also,
back you up on that, I think that it's really important to put statistics into context, and that's why I think talking to people is really important, because the numbers don't explain context, and sometimes the context in which they're shared. Bye, Red.
Bye, Red. Thank you.
I love you all. I love you, absolutely.
Thank you, Red.
Love you too.
Love you too, Red.
So yeah, for everybody who's listening, if you're, the source is really important, context. So my background is journalism. It's really important that you understand where statistics are coming from, where reporting is coming from, what the organization is that's sharing it. Every organization is going to have some sort of agenda. That doesn't mean that there's a full spectrum of bias, right? Some are highly biased and some are much closer to neutrality, but there's no such thing as actual neutrality. It's all contextual. The same way that human choice, as we were talking about, is contextual. And so we have to understand everything in context. We can't take the context of the African-American experience and look at it from the perspective of, I don't know, the Colombian experience, because it's just completely different. The context is really important. And I think that one of the challenges is for those who have a very kind of solidified or I don't know, crystallized view of what the world is and what the context is, to take yourself out of the context that you think is the way it is really difficult. You know, it's like you have to say, oh, the things that I know may not be true, and to challenge yourself in that way, it's really hard. Speaking of choice, you know, that's a really hard choice to make. I've been doing it lately, you know, in an increased way, hopefully always to an extent. But to say like, all right, I have certain ideas, maybe they're not right, you know, maybe I can position them in the right context.
I feel like I'm definitely, sometimes it's not even that I had an opinion, sometimes I just didn't think about certain things, which is worse sometimes, sometimes. So there's a couple of different things. It's like we can challenge the beliefs that we already have, and then we can look into the components that lend itself to this kind of pain and this kind of crisis that we're having, and say, you know, what did I either miss or what did I just consciously overlook because it didn't affect me? And I'm also thinking about some of the reasons why maybe it didn't affect me, you know, not understanding growing up that maybe it didn't affect me simply because of the color of my skin. I don't know. I didn't grow up ever feeling discriminated against. You know, I'm European, I'm Persian. I was raised in a Lebanese household, and I didn't feel that even growing up in a predominantly Irish Catholic neighborhood. Is that because it was the color? I just never thought about it. So it's, you know, it's not even like I believe that this is the reason why. It's that I never even had the conversation with myself or with anybody else because, and I think this is the point, I didn't have to. And that doesn't make me a bad person. I think people that know me think I'm a good person. It's not a matter, because we're hearing a lot about that too. Good people, bad people. There's good Black people and bad Black people and good white people and good, you know, bad and good cops and bad cops. And sometimes it goes so far beyond that we don't realize it, because again, we're stuck in our own story. So sometimes a lot can come from just reading other stories. And like Red was saying, having these other conversations that maybe expose us to different stories. It's expanding our reading list, so to speak. So that's how I'm approaching it too.
Yeah. There's something I wanted to add about the, you know, to your point earlier about the different emotions that impact, you know, the experience that we have. And I think that's something really damaging, you know, that is a really problematic, I think, emotion that humans have. I mean, it's there for a reason, but unfortunately, our society, we're often not prepared to handle it, is the emotion of shame. And there's a lot of shaming going around. And to your point, like labeling people as good or bad in these kinds of hard line terms without any context and without understanding, well, what do you mean by good? What do you mean by bad? And unfortunately, that can lead to feelings of shame. And you know, what we know is that when somebody feels ashamed, they are not likely to act in a positive way. There's a very big difference between the feeling of guilt and the feeling of shame. The feeling of guilt can be positive. It's like, oh, I've done something wrong. I need to do something to overcome that feeling. So it can be positively motivating. The feeling of shame is kind of an extreme poisonous kind of guilt, which makes you feel unworthy and ostracized. It feels like you're not allowed to talk, you're not allowed to connect, you're not allowed to explore and question. You're just a piece of shit. And when somebody expresses themselves in a way, and this is rampant on social media, somebody makes a comment because they're angry or they're, you know, whatever, they're trying to process their emotions, and then a bunch of other people attack that person. The feeling of shame that results is that person retreating into their experience and not asking those important questions of like, what is it I don't know? Where can I learn? how can I connect more with people to explore, to expand my horizons, and to change my perspective? And so a message that I have is that when communicating with people, it's so important to recognize shame and to try to help people come back from that place.
You know,
Even though the easiest thing is to just be angry and to lash out.
Mm-hmm.
It's like nowadays people are too fast to judge, and it's becoming like way too fast. You don't support the looters, you're racist, like this, and statements like that. It's horrible, and that's what really scares me. When people don't have appropriate conversation and they just don't admit that they were wrong with something and they thought wrong.
They can, sometimes things can exist simultaneously. You can say Black Lives Matter and I support law enforcement. You can say that can exist at the same time. And people sometimes get that confused. And to your point, Danny, you know, Brene Brown always talks about the difference between guilt and shame being situational versus character trait. You know, guilt is I did something bad, like you were saying, and shame is I am bad. There is a much different feel when you have that feeling is I am a bad person versus, like you said, I did something bad and I can learn from it and I can still do better and I can do good and we can fix this. So I think also what I'm hearing you saying is that we should watch our language and think about in terms of how it may make a person feel, because their response could be contingent upon that feeling.
Yeah, and so that requires, you know, active listening, empathetic communication, as well as communicating from facts, you know, and from carefully studied, vetted facts, and not throwing facts at people to prove that you're right, but to have a conversation that isn't necessarily based on an emotional outburst, but like, here is a piece of fact that we can have a conversation around and listen to each other and see how that evolves and helps us learn and grow. If both people are feeling ashamed or both people are feeling extremely angry, it's very difficult to have that conversation. And that's why opening this up is really important. And I don't think this is like the perfect example here, you know, but we had the intention.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that intention is really important too.
I think it will help us challenge our confirmation bias. And confirmation bias is we biologically, we kind of like seek out things and sources that confirm what we already believe. You know, so there can be a lot of good that comes out of challenging that. You might challenge it and still come back to feel the way you do, but you know, there's something about taking that action towards seeing another point of view or getting a better source of information for your facts and changing it up a bit.
Who can't relate to having some sort of thought or opinion and then going on Google and validating it?
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I think this group of people is blank, or you know, I believe that this political point of view is true. Okay, I'm going to go find some articles to back it up. It's much more difficult to go online and search for the opposite. And really, that's kind of like doing that is kind of the scientific mentality. If you go on and look for the opposite, you have to first go on and eliminate all of the counterpoints until you get to truth. You know, that's very difficult when it's so emotionally fraught. You know, but to the point about looking at statistics, it's like, well, this is one group of statistics. What's the context of that? And what other information is available that can have the counter argument? And when you really boil it down and see all of that in an array, it's much easier to form a more objective or an opinion that's closer to the truth, or at least closer to something that's beneficial for humanity.
And do we search for that other point of view? Like you're saying, like if we do the Google search and what comes up supports our point of view, do we just stop immediately? Because I feel like when we find ones that are counter to our point of view, we continue on to still find the ones that maybe confirm what we're thinking. It's interesting behaviorally, even to think in human behavior and to think
As
about
I
do things.
sorry.
Oh, no, no, of course. Go ahead, Anna.
As I was taught, it's way more important to first prove your opponent's thought and then prove your own.
Mm.
That's how you get the full picture, with understanding how your opponent in your dispute thinks and why he thinks this way.
I have a little example of that. I was having a Facebook back and forth with somebody who made a statement that I initially very strongly disagreed with. And I can paraphrase. It was something about how that this is just a political ploy by the Democrats during an election season, and ultimately 95% of the trouble here is caused by Democrats and kind of Black people voting against their own interests, and it's all just like this loop. So my initial instinct was, this person is racist, right? That was my gut reaction, my knee-jerk reaction. And I thought, well, maybe I'll just ask a couple questions. And it got me thinking, like, okay, well, is there actually any truth to what this person is saying? If you just kind of take their point of view for a second and go, where is this coming from? This is a human being with feelings and a life experience. I think this person might come from some sort of law enforcement background. I'm not sure. But they made an interesting point, about like police brutality and that, like the Democratic Party and working against its own interests. There was something in there that was worth having a conversation about. And so for a second, I had to shut down my own assumptions about who this person is and what they're really trying to say. And, and for sure, there's a much longer conversation to be had about that. And I asked, does that mean that people who are not Democrats should be absolved of responsibility, and then you start asking questions. And then immediately after I asked that question, somebody came in and said, like, you're like a Trump supporting evil person. So, that's what happens with these outbursts and these emotions. It's unfortunate because I really want.
Somebody said that to you, or the person?
To the other person. They came in and like were like, screw you, instead of continuing like, okay, well, what's valid, what's not, like, how can we learn from this conversation?
That's really bad when it comes to emotion. People are starting to be blind to logical mistakes and misleading things, and it's just making you blind. And sometimes you need to switch off your emotions.
It's interesting. We studied a lot about emotions in positive psychology, and one thing we learned is that all emotions are useful. All emotions have a purpose. From the evolutionary perspective, we developed emotions for survival, and they are all pieces of information. It's not actually possible to shut down emotions. That isn't something that humans are capable of doing. What we can do is redirect them, process them, choose to ignore them now and wait for them to show up in a different way later. But it's not a switch that can be turned on and off. The emotions happen in your brain. It's a chemical, and they go through your body and they have an impact, whether you choose to acknowledge it or not. So when it comes to emotions, what is it trying to, what is a particular emotion trying to tell you, and why is it trying to tell you that? So if there's, and also it's when there are a lot of emotions, it's difficult to be in that rational, creative, conscientious part of your brain, because the emotional part of your brain is hijacking your amygdala is essentially hijacking the rest of your brain. It's a survival mechanism. So it's not that emotions are good and logic is, or emotions are bad and logic is good. It's that they have kind of different languages, and you have to communicate in those languages in order to actually use your brain effectively.
And sometimes you have to calm your brain down, that part of your brain that's trying to protect you. Those negative emotions are coming from a place of trying to protect you. And you have to almost say, thank you, I understand. Thank you for trying to protect me. And then make a little space to kind of let other things to come up. Because the emotions themselves, the chemical part of the emotions, that's done in, what is it, 90 seconds, Danny?
Yeah.
That it takes for an emotion to run through us chemically. So if we're still hours and days and years later, still in a heightened state of any particular emotion, that's stemming from the belief system that we have. A belief system that's keeping those emotions alive. So it's a very interesting thing when you go a little bit deeper into it, but emotions really only last for 90 seconds. So if they're still there, it's the stuff that's perpetuating them. That's going on in our heads.
And when you feel unsafe, you know, like, you know, and bringing this back to this conversation that we've had, I'm not an expert in trauma, right? But when you have a traumatic experience, or you've been brought up in a family that has a lot of trauma, in an environment that is trauma inducing, where you constantly feel unsafe, you constantly have lack of opportunity, you constantly have discrimination, and you see it everywhere. It's very easy for you, your brain will start to wire in a particular way, and you know, a traumatized brain looks very different than a healthy brain. And so those emotions that you keep reliving, even though it may be from an abstract or a past idea, it's as if you're still living it right now, and you're experiencing those emotions, even though the stimulus didn't, you know, it's not like someone yelled at you right now. And if you're constantly re-traumatized, you can imagine the impact that can have on your ability to live kind of a peaceful, happy life. And there's so many studies about how people who grow up in lower income neighborhoods and well, a lot of different factors have shorter lifespans, because that kind of trauma can actually kill you. The amount of stress that it produces in your body can kill you. So when we talk about like privilege and opportunity that certain groups of people have versus others, it even comes down to like the emotional experience of your life. Some people have the privilege of having an easier life and therefore living longer. Yeah. Anything else to add? I think
and what I was saying, we just had like a great example of the language barrier and how we mean different things and using different wordage. So what I mean by switch off emotions, I didn't mean like just switch it off. I mean like to calm it down and like divide the emotions from your rationals, and don't let them influence your decision in total.
Yeah.
And that's what we need to avoid with having a long conversation and asking the right questions. Why?
Yeah, I think why is an excellent question. And yeah, I mean, even though you can't really stop your emotions from having an effect, you can certainly process them in a healthy way. And that's what emotional intelligence is all about. But it's really hard. You know, it's a very difficult thing. It's a skill set that takes years and years to get good at. And even if you are good at it, you know, you're still very vulnerable to emotions. You know, everybody is. Some people are just more aware of it than others.
And also adding the fact that a lot of us are, you know, we've all been in our homes for 3 months. You know, this is this situation is not existing in a bubble. You know, it's working simultaneously with the fact that we have all been struggling already in terms of, you know, what's been happening. People are sick, people are dying and losing their businesses, and there have been so many real challenges. I mean, our cortisol levels, cortisol is the stress hormone that gets released, right, when we're feeling stress. I mean, everybody's levels were already at an all-time high from all of this, because it's so unprecedented in so many ways for us. And then again, getting into a conversation can be very challenging when you're starting off at that point. So we have to have a lot of self-compassion, and we have to have a lot of compassion for others, because like so many said before, we don't know the full story. We don't know anyone's full story. And when we can keep sight of that, that also helps in keeping things more manageable in terms of conversation, so that we could really affect change. We have to remember that we don't know everybody's story. And we have to remember that there are always things we can do personally. We always think about what other people can do, but we have to, you know, think about what we can do as well. It has to be all of that working together. It's not any one thing. It's multiple things that have to work together. And so there are so many resources that have been brought out. They've existed, but now they're even easier to access than ever if you look in the right places. And I know that Amber shared one right in the chat. So I think we would invite all of us to explore them and see what we can do to heal and to help and to move forward.
I think that's a really beautiful point to end on. We've been going for quite a while. And, you know, this is something that could go on for days, but we have to choose a time to end. So I think that could be it. Thank you for everybody who came. And
yes, thank you for everybody who also joined on Facebook and who has been with us as well, in addition to everybody who's here on Zoom.
Yes, absolutely. And keep in touch. Let's keep this going. Let us know if you have questions, if you have comments. We'd love to keep talking about it. It's an ongoing thing.
Feel free to continue to post in the chat. And like Danny said, thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day. Have a great weekend.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.